Okay, we're going to try something new for this week and for the coming weeks as far as our videos go. We're going to look at the next lesson and about Project Next and about 21st century learning. We've spent some time in the first semester giving you some tools, suggesting some ideas of some online tools and some things you can do. But I think right now we can get back into the curriculum, back into the actual learning design. People are in the process of planning their units for semester 2, new classes, new beginnings. There's a bunch of technology in the school and more is coming, but perhaps there's a way to sort of think about, okay, not only do I have, let's say, an iPad in the classroom, but maybe I'm going to do things a little bit differently and really look at 21st century learning skills. As some of you may know, I was at the board last year working with the 21C Learning and Academic ICT team, and we came up with a few things, and the one was Project Next, and this is the idea, that it's our job really, and it's always been our job to educate the next generation. But the problem now is that the technology in the world is changing so fast and so fundamentally and so quickly that it's impossible to really plan. I mean, could you have seen? I mean, if you think about the fact that, for instance, an iPad is only 3 years old, right? They only came out in 2010, and to think about how it's changed the way people do computing, the way people read, the way people research, and all those sorts of things. And that's just a small example. So to say that we're going to create a system that's essentially or recreate a system is something that's necessary. I mean, we were using basically the same system that's been used for about 150 years with the same expectations, a content-driven system, and that has to simply change. I mean, there isn't really even a debate about whether or not it needs to change. It's just the debate now is about how you do that and what that looks like. So we as a board committed to trying to see what that looks like. So what we have here is a presentation that we gave, and I'm going to sort of go through parts of it, and we'll look at this a little bit more in depth in some of our staff meetings and maybe even at the end of the year. But I thought I'd give some people a little crash course on some of the things. So where does this come from? Basically, what we have, we borrowed basically Microsoft contracted out this ITL research, and it's innovative teaching and learning, and they did it with a branch of Stanford University's research team, and they took about 6 to 7 years and went to 7 or 8 different countries across the world, literally all over the world, and looked at innovative teaching and learning, looked at what the needs were, didn't only talk to educators, but also talked to private industry, to manufacturing and private sector people, government people, to see really what were the skills necessary for such an evolving economy, for such an evolving world, and basically brought it back to say this is what they're calling 6 competencies. This is what's important. This is what we really need to do and what we really need to work on. So what it basically, this is one of their diagrams. Sorry, I'll go back to that. And the idea is they looked nationally at educational policy and in the professional development, and then broke it down into schools, into teachers, and looked at what does a school culture look like, where is ICT, what's the access, what's the support, what is an educational attitude, what do we need to do, and then it sort of broke all those things into what do we need to be able to start to do differently. So that's the innovative teaching practices, and then the outcome is really the idea here is what's the practice that we can do so that we can outcome a student who is prepared for a world that we admittedly don't know a whole lot about, but we can say, since we really don't need to teach them as much about content, they can find that. What we need to do is teach them the skills to be able to not only define that content, but to be able to critically analyze that content and then to work at it in a much different way, than the world has ever worked before. So that's essentially what their model is. And then they came up with 6 competencies, and this is what's going to be the spirit of the next 5 to 6 video sessions that I give to our Panther Pace newsletter. So the first, we'll go through these in more detail, but collaboration. And again, this is not just working in groups, but truly working in groups. And we're going to talk about things like interdependent learning, real collaboration, what that means and what that looks like. And it's interesting that they make a real distinction here between collaboration and competition. And in fact, competition isn't even included in this. And then they're saying that that's sort of a lost art. So the idea of even grading and ranking kids is something we need to move away from. Knowledge construction, and this is a big difference as well. I mean, if you were to look at what's our industrial revolution model would say, essentially knowledge acquisition really is finding facts and memorizing them, committing them to some sort of a memory and a knowledge set. But really here is creating that knowledge, and it's the idea of constructing what that looks like to you and personalizing it is really the big push for the research that we've done. Real world problem solving and innovation. I have kind of a problem with the idea of real world problem solving. I hate that term. You know, when adults talk to students in a patronizing way and say, when you get into the real world, well, I mean, it is the real world for them. It is the real world for us. That's what we decided to do with our lives, for goodness sakes. But what they're talking about here is a move away from, if you want to call it case studies or these problems that are just sort of made up. I mean, you might think about a word problem in math or a case study in a business course or something like that where it has no actual bearing. It might sound like it's something real, but it isn't actually something real. The idea here is that with the way technology is now and the way social media, there's no reason that these students can't be actually solving real problems. I mean, see Craig Kielberger, see that type of thing, right? So the learning that can go on there is exponential. Skilled communication, this is huge, and the idea that, again, we've talked about the fact that social media and technology is just in such a different way. You need to be able to communicate in many different ways, many different modes of communication. And again, as opposed to simply being consumers of media or of ideas, of content, it is to be producers of that. And that's the difference I see it as. I mean, things like YouTube, things like the technology that allows students to create and make video, to create and make um, their own websites and to become news, to become reporters, really does change the game and changes what not only what they're capable of, but also the peril that's out there. I mean, they're capable of great things, but they're also capable of getting into some serious trouble. So there's some things we need to do there. That goes along with that idea of self-regulation. The spoon feeding of education isn't workable. I have plenty of friends who are, most of my friends actually are private sector people, and I asked one of them this, and he's a vice president of a marketing company, and an online marketing and sales company, and he had said, I said, what are you looking for? And his basic point here is around self-regulation. He's saying, what I need, what you guys do a terrible job of, and he was meaning me as an educator, was, I mean, you guys, spoon feed kids one step at a time, all the time, one step at a time. I need somebody who can, I'll give them a goal, I'll give them a problem, I need them to be able to go and solve it and check in with me about progress and those sorts of things, but not needing every step of the way. He's managing people, and this is a new, pretty much a normal thing now. He manages teams all over the country. He doesn't have a central office space. He's meeting people. He's doing online meetings. He's doing conference calls, those sorts of things. He works from his BlackBerry and from his home for the most part. He'll travel when he needs to, but for the most part, he needs people to be able to do what they need to do, and then just simply check in with him as needed. So there's the idea of self-regulation there. It's huge, and if you look at if I was to look at my classes, and even though I was teaching at Mary Ward, that's supposed to be a self-regulated school, I would say I did a pretty poor job of that myself as well. And then the last one is the use of ICT for learning. And the idea here is that how do you use technology for learning? And it's an interesting point. A lot of people get tripped up with the fact that this is what we mean by 21st century learning, ICT, but you'll see it's one point of six. You can do all of these things, and the examples that we show and that we would give, you can do all these things without technology at all, or at least not as a central role. The technology will make some of these things easier, will make some of these things more immediate, but you don't need technology to do any of these things. Just to take a step back on this, Microsoft has a Partners in Learning competition every year. They have a global competition. It's quite impressive, really, if you think about it. A global competition of educators from all over the world, and they bring the educators together. There's regionals and nationals, and then they bring them together for a world competition. And basically what they do is they use this framework as their judging. The judges use this, and the projects are submitted under the idea of collaboration or knowledge construction, or uh, the whole framework entirely. And so we've used this. Lori DeMarco, who's the superintendent of 21st Century Learning and Academic Information and Communication Technology, she was a judge in Prague 2 years ago, um, and or just over a year ago actually. And she kind of brought back this scale, and then we worked with some of the people from ITL to develop our own. How did we develop our own? We included the Catholic graduate expectations. That's what we did. So we took the, if you want to call it, the rubrics that they used for that competition in regards to those 6 competencies, and worked in our Catholic graduate expectations, worked in our language, and then also worked in our project NeXt Spectrum of Comfort. This is what we developed 2 summers ago. And the idea here is that an educator, a student, an administrator, a parent can look at this and say, where am I as far as comfort when it comes to anything, whether you talk about collaboration or self-regulation or real-world problem solving. The point here is that a teacher can look at their lesson and say, okay, where do I honestly think I am? Am I at the entry point, adoption, going through? We've always identified this, the adaptation stage, as sort of the most, is where things start to change. Entry point always is, you're just starting, you're just thinking about it. We get very specific when we get into the next lesson. Adoption is when you're starting to use the things and you're starting to do it, but for the most part, if you're thinking about technology, for instance, you're starting to use technology, but you're using it to do the same things you were doing before. Adaptation is where you start to change, when you understand the need to change, and you identify, okay, I need to do things a little bit differently. And then you're getting into infusion, in which it's sort of everywhere, and then transformation, in which things have changed. So what we did was take the scale, take the research and the Catholic graduate expectations, and put them into what we call the next lesson. And this is a tool, a 6-category tool, if you want to call it that, for a teacher to be able to look at their practice, look at one lesson, and be able to say, where am I? So they ask themselves simple questions to identify where they are, and then use those same questions to say, how can I move maybe one thing along the way? Just a couple points of clarification. I just want to check my time here. Yeah, I'm coming up to the end of it. A couple points. You're never going to have a lesson in which you're doing all 6 categories and doing them all at transformation. That's not going to happen. And you don't even want it to happen. There are times when you need to be very specific and very directed, and be at the entry or adoption level. You can't possibly, you'll drive yourself crazy if you try to think of a lesson in which you do everything all at transformation. The hope is not, and this will never be something that's used um, for an assessment or an evaluation, an appraisal, a TPA, anything like that. What we're looking at here is that teachers get that chance to look at self-reflect, give themselves or even each other descriptive feedback to say, yeah, this is what I think, this is where I am, and I really want to move it along. So what we're going to do is offer you videos for each of the 6 competencies, little ones, little um, insight into it a little bit, I guess is what you could call it. It won't be exhaustive, it won't be everything, but we'll go through it one per week. I'll do the first one, collaboration, for next week, and put it in the Panther Pace. Maybe I'll do 1 or maybe 2, depending on how long they take. And the hope here is that it's just something that you can look at, and if you want to use it, we'll get much more detail into it at the end of the year or into next year. And some of the teachers who are working with some of the people from the AICT, perhaps they can be doing a little bit more details of it. But this is what we're going to be doing. Our focus for the next few weeks, as far as these little snippets of professional development, will be about the next lesson. I hope it can be helpful, and we'll go from there.